I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Everdell Silverfrost from Starling Games. This is not going to fall into the format of my usual reviews because I'm going to be primarily focusing on how this differs from regular Everdell and my thoughts around that. But if you don't already know, I'll give you my brief thoughts on Everdell, very brief, very condensed. If you want to watch a full review, go ahead and check out I'm pretty sure I have a full review on Everdell somewhere, but check that out. Generally, I'm a huge fan of Everdell. It is a 5 out of 5 game for me. I love Everdell. I haven't played all the expansions. The ones I have, I've enjoyed. I love Everdell Farshore. I think it's a great implementation in this series, a standalone Everdell game that manages to do enough to stand out. And now I have Everdell Silverfrost over here. Before we get into Silverfrost, the reasons I like Everdell primarily come down to the combination of, first of all, the world and art certainly does not hurt. Even though they have used several artists at this point across the series, they've done a great job building up a beautiful world that really leans into those creatures and, well, all the things you can do with them. As far as the gameplay aspects, I love the worker placement combination of worker placement to gather resources, to go ahead and play all the various cards that you need. There's a ton of cards that all combine together to give you this engine that you're working towards across those 4 rounds of play. And the vast variety of cards often gives you different approaches to how you can combine different things in your favor, whether you focus more on the engine in the game, whether you're trying to gather a whole bunch of endgame scoring cards, whether you're building up a bunch of blue cards to give you various extra benefits from all the various things you're going to do. There's a lot of ways to try to mix and match and combine in the game to give you a thoroughly satisfying experience. It doesn't hurt that the game starts off incredibly constrictive where you're like, how can I even play? Like, the game says you can have 15 cards. I can't even I can't even build like 2 or 3 cards in round 1. How am I going to build 15? But then your economy ramps up and how much you get to do just gets higher and higher and higher. And by the time you reach the end of the game, you were able to get done all of the things that you wanted to do. This is a very short general summary of why I like Everdell. There's a lot more to it, but I'm primarily going to focus on Silverfrost and how this mixes things up or doesn't mix things up, and my general thoughts on Silverfrost. I'll start with the easy one. Silverfrost is another 5 out of 5 for me. It sticks close enough to the Everdell formula that I thoroughly appreciate. The artwork is different and yet similar enough in a way that I thoroughly enjoy as well, and the core functionalities are there, and the things that are different, while they do have differences, and we'll talk about whether it's worth having both, that's a different conversation. As far as ranking the gameplay on its own, it does deliver what I want out of an Everdell experience, and I have thoroughly enjoyed playing through it. It is another 5 out of 5, which again, Everdell for me was Farshore. I wasn't at first, but did grow to be a 5 out of 5 for me, and this one sticks a little closer to the formula that Everdell has, whereas Farshore added, I think, a few more differences, and again, that is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing in the sense that it gives me that reliable, okay, great, this is Everdell, 5 out of 5, easy. On the other hand, it also is a question of, is it different enough that it's worth owning both, especially when you're talking about the price point on these games, especially if you want to get the various deluxe versions and all that. I should note, by the way, this is a prototype, rules and components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. But now that I've gotten my kind of final thoughts on Everdell Farshore, well, final thoughts, not on whether it's worth owning, but just on my enjoyment of the experience, let's talk about some of the differences and how those add or don't add, or even just mix up the experience that you're having at the table. To that end, I'm going to talk about the differences one at a time. I will note I'm not walking you through how to play Everdell. I'll give you a very brief note on how to play Everdell, but if you want that, check out either the gameplay video that's going out later today, or any other Everdell content on any other Everdell game. But the very brief general idea of how you play Everdell is Everdell is a game that's going to be played across 4 rounds. You're going to start in summer, move to fall, then winter, then back to spring, and that will be the end game. In each of those rounds, you're going to be placing workers. Workers go to a variety of locations on the board that give you resources. Resources are going to let you play cards, and those cards are going to improve your engine so that you can get as much done in the game and play those big point scoring cards that will ultimately help you win the game. That's a very, very short note on how to play Everdell. But let's focus on the differences that Silverfrost brings to the table. And the first of which is going to be, and first is in no particular order here, but the first is the adjustment of the goals. If you play Everdell, there are a bunch of common goals for getting various things. Getting, 3 of each card type, or getting all of the various card types, they'll get goals for that. In Silverfrost, the goals are replaced by a variable goal deck. You'll have a bunch of these blue goals over here, all of which give you something different to do, but there's a lot more than there are in base Everdell. There's a ton of these goals, and you'll only have, well, depending depending on the player count, a certain number of them out for players to claim. And so that variety of the goals is already a step in the direction of, I would say, just improvement, just due to the sheer variety of those goals. There's a lot more things you want to be mindful of as you play, and it's not like you dive into every single game of Everdell playing with those same goal structures. There's a lot of variety to the base goals that are there. This is a plus compared to regular Everdell. Additionally, you have your own private goals. You have this giant deck of private goals over here, which whenever you go to the guild to fulfill a goal, you get to draw 2 private goals and keep one, and that way you can go back to the guild to fulfill private goals even after the public goals are gone, or if you don't have the requirements to take care of those public goals. You'll also start with 2 of these cards, of which you'll pick one, which gives you these private goals that are worth less points, but still nice chunks of points for a single worker placement action that can thoroughly add up across the course of the game. And again, that's just a good thing. It gives you more things to do. You can focus on them if you want, but on the other hand, you don't. You can focus on the core engine building, you can focus on the public goals. There's still a ton of things that you can focus on. The private goals just give you one more thing that you are able to go ahead and focus on, and I like that. This is another small plus as far as Everdell goes. Then we have the big critters. The big critters are going to be present on this mountain over here. So we have this mountain, which I have the cardboard mountain over here. There is a, for the standard version, there's this mountain, and then for the deluxe version, there's a wooden mountain. But this mountain gives you a few things. It gives you a place to hold your snow. Over here, you can hold your snow tokens, which we haven't talked about. It also gives you these big critters that go onto the mountain, as well as a place for the beacons, which you'll have beacons equal to the player count in the game. Now, when you go to a beacon location, you have to pay a fire. We haven't talked heavily about fire, we'll get back to that, but fire is a new resource that's going to be present along with snow in Silverfrost. But when you go to one of these mountains, you play a fire, you put your critter down, and then you can take one of these critters to activate that critter, and then remove it from the mountain, taking the points above, taking the point scoring benefit, taking the points above the critter, taking the benefit on the critter, and then drawing a new critter to replace it as the critters move slowly up the mountain. This has the effect that as a critter moves up the mountain, eventually people are going to want that 3-point critter, because the critters are almost always good in some form or another, and when you tap 3 points on top of that, it generally becomes worth seeking out. So the big critters, again, if you've played base Everdell, the big critters are functionally a replacement for the special locations you have in the game. Everdell is going to have base locations that show up in every single game, but they also have a few locations that are variable from a pool of locations that show up in the game, mixing up the experience. So boom, you have this cooler location that gives you 2 wood and a stone and lets you do a little bit more in the game. The big critters function like that, but I think the big critters are again an improvement on base Everdell. You see, the big critters, first of all, they give you these chunks of points and they ramp up nicely, which makes them very, very sought after, but at the cost of that fire when you go to that location. Fire is a resource you're going to want to manage, you're going to need a lot of it, and so you have to choose whether it's worth paying that fire to get that critter location. But additionally, the fact that the locations are always mixing up, there's no static location across the rounds of the game, you are always mixing up those critters, you take one, new one comes out, which means there's more of a sense of use it or lose it. There's less permanence to it, more variety, and so I generally think that the big critters, in addition to the beautiful art they add to the game, and the fun aspect of having a critter help you out, I think the big critters are another plus in terms of making this feel better than base Everdell does. And again, it's always not necessarily a fair comparison. Base Everdell has expansions, you can mix things up, but ultimately I do think that is an improvement over the base locations that Everdell has. Then if you've played Everdell, and this is something that they kind of stuck with in, well, let's talk about this. If you played base Everdell, there's the concept of playing critters into locations that they can go to. So certain locations can host certain types of critters for free, which means there's an aspect of choosing constructions. There's 2 main card types, constructions and critters. From those, there's uniques and commons over here, and that base structure from Everdell maintains that, well, same structure here in Silverfrost, but the way to play a critter for free is different. In base Everdell, you specifically have specific critters that go to specific constructions. So if you seek out a courthouse, a judge can possibly go into the courthouse. Versus, that is something that they've shifted up both in some of the expansions of Everdell, but also in Everdell Farshore, they shifted it up to being more categorization. You get a token that you can use to play a critter for free, and in Silverfrost over here, they kind of lean on that to a certain extent. They have these chimneys. They have these chimneys you're going to get one as you move into fall, and one as you move into winter, and those chimneys will allow you to play cards for free, but specifically having some degree of constriction. So for example, this Great Hall will allow me to play a purple card using a chimney and a fire token. This Lodge will allow me to play a red card using a chimney and a fire token. Meaning in Everdell Farshore, they had it specifically matching card colors. There's 5 card colors in the game. In Silverfrost, it's specifically telling you a type that the card matches, but there's not a specific requirement for an exact one. But then again, you can't do it the entire time throughout the game. You can only do it when you have those Chimneys. So that means twice per game, plus abilities that will let you reuse Chimneys on those cards. So there are times to do it more, but the basic idea is you get those free 2 critter placements. I'm always mixed on that, both in Farshore as well as in Silverfrost. I think that the free openness of I can do as much as I want, but I have to find the cards, does lend itself nicely to what base Everdell is doing and to trying to seek out those cards. I do like the original way, but the downside is as you add more cards to the deck, it becomes, as you add expansions in, it becomes more and more unbearing, and that's not the right word. It becomes harder and harder to rely on that randomness to work out in its favor. Again, some of the expansions of Everdell kind of address it, giving you both a combination of card types, but then some with less specificity. I like the way it's done here. I think I still ultimately am a fan of the way base Everdell does it, but I recognize why they have chosen to shift it out in expansions, in Farshore, and in Silverfrost. So it still works. It's still incredibly satisfying to play a critter for free, to plan around, oh, I'm going to get that 4-cost critter in, and I'm not going to pay a cent for it. That is an incredibly satisfying experience, so still is a excellent part of the game. I still prefer base Everdell, but it is a good. I understand the reason for the shift, which I've said 3 times now. That's going to be another change. Then we have fire and snow. Now, fire and snow is going to be the big kind of underlying main mechanic difference over here. Because you have snow that across the seasons, as the seasons change, you're going to be taking snow from the top of the mountains and placing it both onto cards or locations in the core area over here, as well as onto personal cards that you've built out. So if I've built this card out over here, I may be putting a snow onto that card, effectively rendering it moot until I can get rid of that snow. For all sakes and purposes, it does not exist until I can get rid of that snow. Which, getting rid of snow is going to cost 1 fire until you move into winter, at which point you'll flip this and it'll start costing 2 fire because now you're in Winter's Fury. And it'll cost 2 fire to get rid of every snow. Now the problem is, if snow stops you from going to certain locations, and if snow renders those cards you've purchased completely not existing, then you need to get rid of snow to both go to spots that will help you in your engine, as well as to get back the cards you put that energy into building in the first place. But that means you'll need a lot of fire. Now the good news is, as you move from season to season, you do get fire for the cards in your city, but it's not going to be enough. You will have more snow to deal with than you're able to. The good news is, whenever you place your ranger, another new concept, your ranger has these little cute snowshoes on them, and your ranger can go to a location that's taken by another person, or it can generate fire if it goes to a location on its own. So when I place a ranger out, I can take a fire, which is going to be an essential aspect to gathering enough fire to get rid of the snow. So will the hot springs, as well as many of the big critters, will give you fire as well. So you're trying to rely on the fire that comes in as you pass seasons, building up enough cards to get as much fire as possible, while also trying to use the various locations that will give you fire in order to trade that fire in to clear out the snow, letting you use those cards in the game and score them at the end of the game. And that core concept, and again, spending 1 or 2 fire to get rid of that snow, or spending fire to get rid of a snow at a location, whenever you do that core concept of the snow slowly taking over the public board and your own cards, and spending fire to remove it, that's where this core aspect of Everdell, it's fine. I don't have a strong opinion for or against it. Don't get me wrong, it works as far as the mechanical aspect of trying to be mindful of another resource to spend, but effectively the entire snow mechanic to me comes down to, we're going to place snow in places that if it doesn't stop you from doing something you want to do, well, just ignore it. If it does stop you from doing something you want to do, either on the main board or your cards, then you kind of have to get rid of it. There are sometimes strategic choices, don't get me wrong, because when it comes to your core cards over here, almost always you're going to want to get rid of that snow because the sheer points you will lose out on, especially if you have purple cards that are relying on that, it's often too much that you can't afford not to ignore it. You can't afford to ignore it. But again, sometimes that's not true. If you don't have a card type, if you have a single green card and it's going to be worth 1 point and none of your other cards care about that, you can just leave it there because you can get that point elsewhere. And so I do find that the snow does lead to a little bit more of number crunching effectively. You're trying to choose, oh, I can go here for final turn and spend a fire, discard 4 cards and get 8 points, or I can clear a snow off this 1 card over here and that's going to be worth 2 points and no other cards care about it. It just becomes a mathematical puzzle of which one is better to go with. Now, to be fair, the entire game, as well as many other games, are mathematical puzzles of what's more efficient with a limited number of actions or resources. So that is that. But I do find that the fire, while I don't mind it, I don't think it added to my experience either. To me, it is a flavor of Everdell. It gives you something else to be focusing on that is encroaching on the game. It does force you into some small different decisions. So, especially early game, you want to build as many cards as possible, or alternatively, very few at all, because of the way you're going to get fire for your cards, but also placing fire on some of your cards. If you can build in the first round, if you can build 6 cards, you'll get 6 fire, but only be encumbered with 3 snow. So there's definite ways you're going to approach the game differently as you play through this, deciding whether an action is worth removing that snow. Also being mindful, by the way, that snow removal is going to be worth points at the end of the game in 2 different modes over here. So the snow as the core underlying concept of the game, it's not that it makes the game worse. I don't think it does. But to me, I don't think it enhanced the game either. When I think of something like Far Shore and the shift in the entire ocean track of moving your boat along the edge, that really felt like a much bigger shift to me as far as the experience. And maybe it's not. You can make the argument again that at the end of the day, everything you do in these types of games is an equation of what is the best return on points. But I would say that with Far Shore, it felt more like an opportunity, and with Silverfrost, it feels a bit more like an encumbrance. And while I don't mind that encumbrance because it gives you the resources and tools to deal with, it didn't necessarily enhance my enjoyment or experience as much. The good news is there are other aspects that did. Like I mentioned already, the big critters I think is a better version of the unique locations. The goals I enjoy more than base Everdell. And so for me, where I am in Silverfrost is we're going to return to my kind of general thoughts on it, as well as whether it's worth getting, especially when you have other Everdells. I enjoy Everdell Silverfrost a lot. As Everdell being one of my top games, this is an easy addition to my collection because it's a small box, at least for right now, until they put out expansions. It is another way to play a base Everdell. It's another flavor of the experience, and I love this game, so I don't mind having additional flavors of the experience. And as somebody who knows Everdell, this is easy to dive in, just checking up a few brief rule changes, and just be able to straight up play the game, so it doesn't add that mental rules overhead that adding a new game to your collection can do. So for me, this is an easy addition to my collection, as Everdell is one of my favorite games. But I do think this veers a little more closely to base Everdell than Silverfrost does. They both clearly have the same underlying formula, but as Far Shore does. They all clearly have the same underlying formula, but I think that if you are looking for whether you need this or not, if you have base Everdell, first of all, you definitely don't need this. This is close enough to the experience. There are some small minor improvements, there are some subtle shifts in gameplay as far as the entire snow puzzle, but ultimately it's going to be more money to go ahead and get something that has these small improvements, and if you're enjoying your Everdell as is, I think you can continue to enjoy Everdell as is. If you are a huge super fan of Everdell as I am, this is probably an easy addition. It's a good variation within the same universe with its own art style to it that is solid. As much as I love Andrew Bosley's art, I'm enjoying these small subtle shifts in these Everdells as well, and it gives you enough differences that there are reasons to pick up and play one of these games or the other. And I haven't even talked about it, but visually, I think I prefer the mountain to the tree that Everdell has. It's a great addition. Although both of them are better than the lighthouse that Far Shore has. So all of them have their own benefits and pros and cons as far as they go, but I think ultimately it veers closely enough to Everdell that you certainly don't need it, but if you're a huge fan of Everdell, then I certainly do recommend it, and if this is your first Everdell, I don't know if the snow will be as enjoyable. If this is your very first Everdell experience, I think that this adds more layers of things that get in your way compared to what Everdell or possibly Far Shore does. I think Far Shore might be the best entry point to the Everdell universe, even though I don't necessarily know if it's I don't know which one of my favorite is. These are harder questions to answer. I think Everdell Far Shore might be the best entry point to the universe. I think Silverfrost is excellent, but because of that snow aspect, it might not be best as a first Everdell, and because of the similarities, it's probably not needed as a subsequent Everdell unless you are a huge fan. So that's kind of where I am with this. I really enjoy it, I like it, but the big question with these games is, do they veer enough from the core to be worth getting? Anyways, I hope you found this helpful in some way, shape, or form. Again, I'm both a thorough fan of the game, or also skeptical as to when you need more copies of a game. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out the gameplay video later today, and of course, I'll have links to the campaign and all that down below. As always, I hope you have a good one.